Somewhere beneath Nightspire Keep, a king was dying, and no one had told him the truth. It was not the poison climbing black beneath his skin that would kill him tonight. It was the person who had been standing closest to his throne for 30 years. Killian Ashgrave had ruled the Nightspire Court for 200 years. He had buried enemies, crushed uprisings, and taught an entire hidden kingdom to lower its voice at the sound of his name. None of that mattered now. Now he was only a body failing in a chair, veins climbing his throat like roots through stone, his own heartbeat counting down the seconds he had left to spend. "Your Majesty," the physician said, unable to meet his eyes. "I am sorry. There is nothing left to try." Killian did not answer. He could not. Every breath cost more than he had left to give. Then the door slammed open so hard it cracked against the wall, and an old woman's voice cut through the room before her body caught up to it. "Ruth, wait." That was Elena, and it was a daughter's fear dressed up as an order, except it was not her daughter running toward the dying king. It was her grandmother, silver-haired, thin as a reed, bare feet silent on the cold stone floor, moving faster than a woman of 81 years had any business moving. In her hands was something that should not have existed inside these walls. A black box carved with silver symbols Killian had not laid eyes on in 30 years, not since they were sealed away with his brother's memory. Ruth did not slow down. She did not flinch at the blood on his lips or the veins spreading beneath his skin like cracks working through glass. And she did not so much as blink at the raw animal terror in the eyes of a king who had never once in 2 centuries let anyone see him afraid. She simply crossed the room and set the box in his shaking hands, as easily as passing him a cup of tea. Killian stared down at the crest he had thought no living soul remembered. For one suspended second, his failing heart forgot to be afraid of the poison at all. "Where?" he forced out, barely a whisper. "Where did you find this?" Ruth turned her head toward the far wall, toward a portrait he had kept behind a curtain for 3 decades, hidden from the servants, from the council, from himself. "Behind your brother's picture," she said, plain as weather. It wanted to be found. Something in Killian went cold that had nothing to do with dying, because if that box had been hidden behind that painting, in a room no living soul was supposed to know existed, then whoever had poisoned him had not gotten lucky. They had known exactly where to look, which meant they had been standing close enough, trusted enough, patient enough to watch him die for weeks and smile at him the entire time. The king of the Nightspire Court was 30 seconds from death, and he had just understood that the monster in this story had never been him. 3 months earlier, Elena Cross had $11.36 on the kitchen table, and 8 rejections sitting unheard in her voicemail. "What are you counting, honey?" Ruth asked without looking up from the puzzle spread across her lap, the pieces sorted by color, the way she still insisted on doing, even on the days her memory slipped sideways on her. "Just seeing what we've got, Nana." Elena slid the folded orange notice under the mail before Ruth could ask about the number printed across the top in bold, unfriendly letters. 72 hours. She was not fast enough. Ruth never missed anything, not even now, not even on the days she forgot what year it was. "What's that orange paper?" she asked. "You tucked it away awful quick." "It's nothing," Elena said, and turned the puzzle box toward her instead. "A lighthouse against a sunset, half finished." "Tell me again where we got this one." Ruth's face softened, the question doing exactly what Elena had hoped, pulling her sideways into a gentler memory. "Your grandfather bought me that the summer we drove up the coast, before you were even a thought in anybody's head." Elena kissed the top of her silver head so she would not see her face crack. Because that summer and that grandfather and the version of this family that had once had 2 working incomes and a mortgage instead of an eviction notice, all of it belonged to a life that had quietly come apart, piece by piece, until it was just the 2 of them left holding what remained. Marcus had promised to stay, too, right up until the morning he did not. Elena never told her grandmother the whole of it, only that sometimes people leave because they never learned how to remain. It did not hurt less to say it that way, it only hurt quieter. The call came 2 days before the notice expired. "Live-in position," the woman on the line said, crisp and rehearsed. "Room, board, and a wage most families in this county would fight over." Elena's grip tightened on the phone. "What's the catch?" she asked, because there was always a catch when the number sounded that good. A pause on the line said more than the sentence that followed it. "The man who runs the estate does not tolerate company," the woman said. "He will test you. Most do not last the week. And Miss Cross, there can be no other residents on the grounds. That is not house policy. That is his." Elena looked across the room, to where Ruth sat with a puzzle piece, pressed thoughtfully to her lips, humming something from 1960-something. She had no other doors left to try. We'll be there tomorrow, she said, and told herself she would find a way to keep her grandmother hidden. She had to. Ruth pressed her face to the car window the moment the estate came into view and did not blink again for a full minute. Black spires cut into a pale, cloud-veiled moon above the little town of Ravenmore, Vermont, a place that showed up on no tourist map and preferred it that way. Stone gargoyles perched along the roofline, worn smooth by a century of rain, seeming to track the car the way old statues sometimes do when the wind moves just right. A garden lay dead and frosted beneath windows where every curtain had been pulled shut, as though the whole house were holding its breath. Elena Jean, Ruth whispered, using the name she only reached for when something rattled her all the way down. Why does it feel like it's looking at us? Elena did not have an answer. She only reached over and took her grandmother's hand. The housekeeper, a stern, kind-eyed woman named Mrs. Whitfield, met them at the door with a lantern and a warning dressed up as advice. Whatever you hear in this house, she said, the king must never learn there is anyone else on these grounds. Elena nodded and told herself Ruth would stay downstairs, tucked into the small guest room off the kitchen, far from every hallway that mattered. She had no idea her grandmother had already decided otherwise. Killian did not look up when the new maid entered his chamber. Another one, he said. How long will you last? A week, if it please your majesty. I intend to do my work, Elena said. They all say that, he answered. The last one said that and lasted until sundown. His eyes finally moved to her, taking in the plain gray uniform, the hands already rough from other people's houses. Charity case, he said. Wonderful. I am not here for your approval, your majesty, Elena said. I am here to work. That got his attention. Most of them cried by now. She did not. She set down the tray, straightened a blanket he would only kick off again within the hour, and said nothing else. He let her go without another word, entirely unaware that a second, smaller visitor was already climbing the stairs behind her. The door creaked. I said no more trays tonight, Killian muttered without opening his eyes. I did not bring a tray, said a voice that belonged to no one who worked in this house. He opened his eyes. An old woman stood in his doorway, small and unbothered and entirely uninvited, studying his dark room like she was deciding whether she approved of it. You should not be in here, he said. Where is whoever is meant to be watching you? Downstairs, probably wondering where I've wandered off to again, Ruth said, unconcerned. Why do you keep it so dark in here? Don't you like the sun? I prefer the dark, he said. Leave. Instead, she lowered herself into the chair across from him with the careful, unhurried grace of someone whose knees had opinions about sudden movement, and pulled a little tin of watercolor pencils from her cardigan pocket. You look sick, she said, matter of fact, not unkind. Is anyone coming to see you today? Something old and locked shifted behind his eyes. No one comes, he said. I prefer it that way. Okay, Ruth said, opening the tin like the matter had been settled between them. I'll stay a while then. Killian stared at her the way a man stares at weather he cannot explain. He did not tell her to leave again. It was the portrait that ended the visit, half hidden behind its curtain, a painted face too much like his own to belong to a stranger. Ruth pointed her pencil at it. Why does that picture look just like you? She asked. Killian was out of his chair faster than a dying man should have been able to move. Leave, he said again, sharper this time, and she went, but not before she caught it. A small silver symbol carved into the frame, half swallowed by shadow. She had seen that symbol somewhere before. She simply could not yet remember where. She came back the next evening anyway. Killian heard the door and did not bother opening his eyes. I told you to leave, he said. You told me to leave yesterday, Ruth answered, easing herself into the same chair. This is today. He should have called for someone to remove her. He told himself that every single visit, right up until the moment he never did it. Ruth settled by the window the way she always did now and got to work. The pictures started small, the estate with sunlight pouring through windows that, in reality, never opened. Elena mid-laugh, an expression Ruth had clearly memorized because Killian himself had certainly never seen it on the girl's face. Then, one afternoon, a picture of Killian himself, smiling, which was either wishful thinking or an insult, and he genuinely could not decide which. I do not smile, he told her. Not yet, she said, and kept coloring. He did not throw the picture away. He told himself he simply had not gotten around to it. By the end of the week, there were 4 of them tucked beneath a book on his nightstand, and he still had not gotten around to it. Why don't you have any pictures of your own? Ruth asked one afternoon. Pencil paused mid-stroke. My refrigerator back home was covered in Elena's drawings when she was small. You've got nothing on these walls. Memories are dangerous, Killian said, the words coming out flatter than he had meant them to, an old answer smooth from decades of use. Ruth considered that with the seriousness of a much younger woman. Only if you forget the good ones, she said. Killian said nothing, but something in his chest, something that had been locked so long he had forgotten it was a door and not a wall, creaked slightly on its hinge. He thought about that sentence for 3 days straight. Elena found out by accident. She was carrying linens past the king's chamber when she heard it. Her grandmother's voice, easy and unbothered, drifting from behind a door that was never, under any circumstance, supposed to be open to her. She did not knock. She threw it wide. Nana, out now. Her heart was already halfway to the floor, already composing the apology, already packing their bags in her head. Your Majesty, I am so sorry, she said. She wanders sometimes. She doesn't always remember which doors are which. She knows better then. Your grandmother, Killian said, not looking up from the drawing in his lap, is troublesome. Elena's mouth opened. Nothing came out. She refuses to leave when told, he continued. She asks questions that are none of her business. She has ruined at least one perfectly good curtain by insisting I open it. He set the drawing down. She may continue visiting. Elena stood frozen in the doorway, certain she had misheard him. Ruth simply grinned and picked her pencil back up. The staff noticed before Elena let herself believe it. One curtain left open, then two. The king drank his tea without a single complaint about its temperature. The servants no longer flinched walking past his door, and twice now, someone had caught him sitting by the window in the late afternoon, watching the light move across the floor like a man relearning what daylight looked like on purpose. Mrs. Whitfield mentioned it to no one, because there was no explanation that made sense, and unexplained things in this house had a way of turning dangerous the moment you said them aloud. It was Elena who first noticed the tray. Every evening, Lord Malcolm Thorne's personal attendant delivered the king's medicine and nourishment himself, never a housemaid, never anyone else. And every morning when Elena collected the cup, there was a thin, dark ring crusted around the rim that did not wipe away easily and did not smell like anything she recognized. She cleaned it. She said nothing. She told herself it was nothing worth mentioning. Lord Thorne had served this family for decades, longer than Elena had been alive. Men like that did not need watching. She almost believed it. The man who brings the king's tray, Ruth said one evening, feet swinging from the edge of a hallway bench, smells like the room with the locked door. Elena went very still. What locked door, Nana? Ruth pointed without hesitation down the corridor, toward the east wing, where every door had been sealed for as long as anyone on staff could remember, and where Elena had been warned on her very first day never to go. I don't know what's in there, Ruth added, like it was a minor detail. But it smells just like that. Elena said nothing else that night. She did not sleep either. The attack came without warning. Killian went rigid in his chair, breath catching wrong, one hand clawing at the armrest like it was the only solid thing left in the room. Ruth did not call for help. She did not run. She crossed the room and took his hand in both of hers, small and warm against skin gone cold. It passed slowly, the way storms do. Killian sat there afterward, hollowed out, staring at their joined hands, as though he did not understand how they had gotten that way. I do not remember, he said quiet. The last time someone held my hand without wanting something from me in return. I don't want anything, Ruth said, simple and certain. Killian had no answer for that. 2 centuries of ruling a kingdom, and nothing in it had prepared him for an old woman telling him the plain truth. Elena saw him just past midnight, Lord Malcolm Thorne, stepping out of the king's chamber, with the quiet, unhurried grace of a man who belonged everywhere he stood, including places he had no business being at that hour. He noticed her in the shadow of the corridor and smiled, warm and easy, the kind of smile that had probably never once made anyone suspicious in 30 years. Miss Cross working late, he said. She said nothing. She was too busy looking at his hand, because tucked between 2 fingers, small enough to miss if she had not been looking exactly there, was a glass vial, empty. Elena did not sleep that night either, replaying his easy smile, the vial disappearing into his sleeve before she could be certain of what she had seen. It happened fast after that. Killian, who had been sitting up on his own 2 days before, who had let a curtain stay open and asked an old woman questions about her paintings, could barely lift his head from the pillow. The wound where the poison had first taken hold was not healing. For a vampire, for a king, that alone should have been impossible. His regeneration has stopped entirely, one physician murmured to another, low enough that they thought Elena could not hear. I have never seen anything like it in 200 years of service to this family. Could it be his age? The younger one asked. He is 380. This is not age. Something is doing this to him. Elena stood in the corner with a cooling cup of tea in her hands, and thought about a dark ring that never quite wiped clean. Lord Malcolm Thorne stood before the royal council with the calm, mournful expression of a man who hated being right. "I do not say this lightly," he told them, "but we must consider what happens if His Majesty cannot recover. The kingdom cannot be left rudderless, a temporary regency, nothing more, until his strength returns, if it returns." Murmurs of agreement circled the table. Thorne had served 3 generations of Ashgraves. No one questioned a word from a man who had buried the king's father with his own hands. Killian, half conscious in the corridor outside, caught fragments of it through the door. Regency, if it returns, nothing more, and felt something in his chest that should have been suspicion. Instead, it was shame. Thorne had earned trust over decades. Killian had earned nothing but fear from nearly everyone else in this house. He said nothing. He trusted the one man he had always trusted, and let the conversation go. Elena found the stain again the next morning, dark and thin, crusted around the rim, same as before, except this time she did not wipe it away. She folded a clean cloth around it and went looking for the youngest of the estate's physicians, a nervous, kind man named Elias, who still looked at her like a person instead of furniture. She showed him the cloth in an empty corridor, voice low. He went pale before she had even finished explaining where she had found it. "That is not ordinary blood," he said, barely above a whisper. "Then what is it?" she asked. He did not answer. He folded the cloth back into her hand, closed her fingers around it, and told her, with something close to fear in his voice, to never mention this to anyone, especially not to Lord Thorne. Elena walked away with more questions than she had started with, and a growing certainty about who to be afraid of. Ruth had gotten very good at not being seen. It was not hard. People rarely looked twice at an old woman moving slowly through a hallway, and Ruth, patient about it, could go almost anywhere in a house this large if she picked her moments. So when she spotted Lord Thorne moving briskly down a corridor she had never seen anyone use, she simply followed, 10 paces back, quiet as a shadow. He stopped at a door she had assumed was only a wall. He pressed something into it. She could not see what, and it opened. He never once considered that an old woman might be watching. Ruth slipped inside after the door swung shut behind him and found somewhere to wait before he could turn around. The room was full of things clearly forgotten on purpose. Stacks of old documents, dust thick as fabric, a broken crown sitting on a shelf like it had been thrown there in anger, and a portrait of a man who looked enough like Killian to be his brother, except younger, painted with a kind of sadness Killian's portraits never carried. Thorne did not stay long. He knelt by a section of the wall, pressed his palm flat against it, and went still, the way people go still when they are afraid of something they cannot undo. Then he left quickly, without ever glancing toward Ruth's hiding place. The moment he was gone, she crept to that same spot on the wall. It took her only a minute to find the seam he had been pressing. A small compartment, and inside it, a black box carved with silver symbols. She did not know what it was. She only knew that a grown man had looked afraid standing in front of it, and grown men were rarely afraid of anything. She took it. Back in her room, she opened it just enough to see what waited inside, a small crystal vial full of something dark red, an old folded parchment, and a slim silver key. Before Elena's voice came calling down the hall, she closed the box, tucked it beneath her cardigans in the bottom drawer, and went to answer. There would be time to look again later. She had no idea there would not be. The storm hit just after sundown, and it hit hard. Wind tore at the windows. Somewhere in the house, a door slammed loud enough to be heard 3 floors away. The lights failed all at once, plunging every hallway into the kind of darkness that made servants grab for each other's sleeves just to stay oriented. Elena was carrying a candle toward Killian's chamber when she heard the crash. She found him on the floor beside his chair, body seizing, veins gone fully black beneath skin that had lost every trace of color. His heartbeat, when she pressed trembling fingers to his throat, was slow, too slow, and getting slower. "Someone get the physicians," she called, already on her knees beside him, already trying to lift his head. Killian's eyes opened barely. "Leave me," he whispered, and it cost him everything he had left to say it. "No," Elena said, like a wall going up. "I am not leaving you on this floor." The physicians arrived and could confirm only what Elena already knew. Whatever this poison was, it had learned to outrun every cure they had. Killian's breathing went shallow, then shallower, and then the door opened, and Ruth walked in through the chaos as if the storm outside did not exist at all, the black box clutched in both small hands. "Nana, no," Elena's voice cracked. "You cannot be in here." But Ruth was already past her, already kneeling beside the king she had been sketching, smiling for 3 weeks, and she set the box directly into his lap without a moment's hesitation. Killian's eyes found it, found the silver symbols carved into the lid, the crest worn but unmistakable beneath decades of dust. He knew that crest. He had seen it once before. In a small stone room he had never allowed himself to visit twice. Then his voice, when it finally came, was barely a breath, but it carried the weight of 30 buried years. "That box was sealed away with my brother," he said. No one moved. The storm still howled against the windows, the candlelight guttering with every gust, and Killian sat there with his brother's box in his lap and a sentence hanging in the air none of them knew how to follow. "Killian," Elena said, careful and urgent, "you have to open it. Whatever is inside, it might be the only thing left." His hand shook too badly to manage the clasp. Ruth reached over without being asked and undid it for him, gentle like she had done this 100 times before. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, sat a small crystal vial filled with something dark red, darker than blood had any right to be, almost black in the candlelight, moving slower than any liquid should move. Killian's breath caught. "That is not possible," he said. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Nightblood," he answered, the word coming out like it belonged to a story and not a room. "It has not existed in 300 years. My family believed the last of it died with the first vampire queen herself. His eyes did not leave the vial. It can undo what is killing me. But there is only enough for one dose. If the amount is wrong, if it is too late or too much," he did not finish the sentence. He did not have to. Beneath the vial lay a folded piece of parchment, brittle with age. Killian lifted it with fingers gone numb from more than the poison. The handwriting stopped his heart before the poison had a chance to. "Trust no one who stands beside your throne." "Damien," he breathed. Elena looked between him and the page. "Who is Damien?" she asked. "My brother," Killian said, his voice going somewhere far away. "He died 30 years ago. A rebellion, that is what we were told. That is what everyone was told." His thumb traced the ink like it might vanish under too much pressure. "This is his hand. I would know it anywhere." If Damien had written this, hidden this, sealed it behind a portrait no one was permitted to look at, then the rebellion that had killed him had never been a rebellion at all. Someone had silenced him, and whatever he had discovered before he died, he had been trying to warn Killian about it for 30 years. There was no time to sit with the horror of it. "Your Majesty, if we administer this incorrectly," the eldest physician's hands hovered useless over a substance none of them had ever touched in their lives. "Nightblood reacts to the body unlike anything else we know. If the dose is wrong, if the timing is wrong, it could stop your heart permanently instead of saving it. He does not have time for you to be certain," Elena said. "Look at him." She was right, and everyone in the room knew it. Killian's lips had gone the color of ash, his breath coming in fractions now, shallow and spaced too far apart. Elena knelt behind him and pulled him upright against her, one arm braced across his chest to hold him steady. "Nana," she said, "you have to give it to him. Carefully, just like that." Ruth's hands were small around the vial, but they did not shake. She tipped it gently to his lips, the way she might have fed a bird fallen from its nest, patient, unhurried, as though the room around her was not falling apart at all. Killian swallowed what little she gave him. For one heartbeat, nothing happened. Then his whole body convulsed, spine arching hard enough that Elena had to fight to hold him. A sound tore out of him that was not quite a scream. His eyes rolled back, and then stillness, complete and terrible. "Killian," Elena's voice cracked wide open. "Killian, nothing." She pressed 2 fingers to his throat and felt no pulse at all. 3 seconds passed, then 4. The physicians did not move. Ruth did not move. Elena held him against her chest and refused, with everything in her, to believe this was how it ended. Then Killian gasped, a violent, ragged pull of air, like his lungs had forgotten how to work and remembered all at once in a single desperate rush. His eyes opened. For a long moment no one in the room spoke. Killian's gaze found Ruth first, still kneeling beside him with the empty vial cradled in both hands. Then it moved to Elena, whose face was wet with tears she had not noticed falling. "You saved me," he whispered. "She did," Elena said, looking at her grandmother. Killian looked at Ruth, really looked, the way he had not let himself look at anyone in longer than he could remember, and something shifted across his face that none of the staff in that room had ever witnessed. He smiled, not the thin practiced curve he offered the council, but a real one. Ruth grinned back like she had known it was coming all along. By morning, Killian's voice had returned to its usual iron. "Seal the house," he told the guards. "No one leaves. No one enters. I want a full record of everyone who has had access to my chambers in the last 3 months." Lord Malcolm Thorne arrived not long after, composed as ever, concern arranged carefully across his features. "Your Majesty, you should be resting, not giving orders." "I have rested enough," Killian said, and studied him a moment longer than usual. The calm hands, the steady voice, the same face that had stood beside 3 generations of Ashgrave kings. For the first time in his life, Killian wondered what that calm was actually hiding. He said nothing of it, not yet. "There was another spot," Ruth said later once the room had emptied. "In the wall where I found the box, a second one. Smaller. I could not open it. There was no handle, just a little slot, like for a key." "A key," Killian repeated slowly. Ruth nodded, already digging through the box again. "There was one in here, silver." Killian took it from her palm, old, ornate, engraved with a crest he had not seen used in decades, one that belonged not to the royal chambers but to a chamber beneath them, sealed since before he was born. "The east wing," he murmured, "beneath it." The passage was narrow, the air inside stale with decades of undisturbed silence. Killian descended alone, torch in hand, the silver key trembling slightly in his grip, though whether from lingering weakness or something closer to dread, he could not say. The chamber at the bottom was small and circular, and every inch of one curved wall was covered in names, Ashgrave names, names Killian recognized from portraits, from family records, from stories told to him as a child. Beside each one, a date. He did not need to guess what they meant. He already understood, standing there in the torchlight, that he was looking at a record of the dead. His eyes moved down the wall, name after name, until they reached the bottom. The most recent entry had not faded yet. The ink was still dark, still fresh enough to catch the torchlight. Killian Ashgrave, poisoned. Someone had already written it down. Someone had been keeping a record of every murder in his family for 30 years, and they had known, long before tonight, that his name was next. Killian stood in front of that wall for a long time before he trusted himself to move. He did not tell the guards what he had found. He did not tell the council. He climbed back out of the passage, sealed it behind him, and made a decision that surprised even him. He would not confront Thorn, not yet, not with nothing but a list of names and a feeling he could not yet prove. He would need evidence, and he would need help from someone he could actually trust, which, he realized with something close to bitterness, narrowed his options considerably. Elena found him past midnight, still awake, papers spread across his desk in careful, deliberate rows. She should have been asleep hours ago. She came in anyway, closed the door behind her, and asked what he had found. He told her all of it, the chamber, the names, the dates, his own name written in ink still fresh enough to smudge. She did not flinch. She sat down across from him and started reading. They worked through the night like that, side by side, comparing staff schedules against the dates on the wall, cross-referencing who had access to which chambers on which nights. It was slow, tedious work. Neither of them complained. Somewhere around the 3rd hour, Killian noticed her hands, reddened, calloused, skin cracked at the knuckles from years of scrubbing floors that were never hers and carrying trays that were never hers either. "You never complain," he said, without quite meaning to say it aloud. Elena did not look up from the page in front of her. "Complaining does not put food on the table," she said. It was such a small thing to say, but Killian had spent 2 centuries surrounded by people who wanted something from him, titles, favor, protection, gold, and here was a woman with ruined hands who wanted none of it, who measured her days by whether her grandmother ate, not by what a king could give her. He found he could not stop thinking about that. Ruth proved more useful than either of them expected. "Lord Thorn wears the same ring every day," she said the next morning, settled into the window seat with her sketchbook. "Silver, with a little symbol on it. I saw it up close once when he was talking to Mrs. Whitfield." Killian went still. What did the symbol look like? Ruth thought about it, then reached for a scrap of paper and drew it from memory. Small, careful lines, a shape closing in on itself like a coiled thread. Killian's blood ran colder than the poison ever had. It matched the crest carved into the black box exactly. "His attendant, the one who brings the tray every night," Ruth added, like she was listing ordinary facts about the weather. "And I saw Lord Thorn go into that sealed room. That is where I found the box in the first place." 3 details, a ring, a servant, a room, none of them proof enough for a courtroom, all of them more than enough for Killian. Thorn came to find Elena alone, the way men like him always did. She was folding linens in the servants' hall when he appeared in the doorway, pleasant as ever, hands clasped behind his back. "Miss Cross, I understand your grandmother has quite the imagination," he said, his voice staying level, almost kind. "Old women wander. It is harmless, usually. But I would hate for anyone to repeat those wanderings somewhere they might be taken seriously." Elena kept folding. "Is that a warning, Lord Thorn?" "It is advice," he said, stepping closer, something in his expression sharpening just slightly, just enough. Humans who interfere in vampire affairs rarely survive long enough to regret it. I would hate for your grandmother to lose the only family she has left because you could not recognize a kindness when it was offered to you." "I am not giving you the box," Elena said. Thorne's smile did not waver. "You have no idea what you are protecting," he said, and left before she could answer that. Elena did not tell Killian. He found out anyway. One of the servants mentioned it in passing, not realizing what she was repeating, and Killian's reaction was immediate and cold enough that the entire hallway went silent around him. "He threatened you," he said. "It was not a question." "I am handling it," Elena said. "He threatened you," Killian said again, quieter this time, which was somehow worse. For a moment she saw exactly what he was, not the man who had smiled at Ruth's drawings, but the king who had ruled the Nightspire Court through fear for 2 centuries, and the sight of it should have frightened her. It did not. "I am not afraid of him," she said. "I am not worried about him." Killian said, his voice gone very still. "I am worried about you." Elena understood then exactly what he meant, and exactly how long it had been since anyone had worried about her at all. "Stay close to me," he said, "until this is finished." She did not argue. It was Killian who finally asked. "You flinch every time someone makes you a promise," he said one night, watching her across the desk. "Why?" Elena was quiet for a while before she answered. "His name was Marcus," she said. "Ruth's grandson-in-law." Though Elena had raised her own daughter's memory more than she had ever let herself admit out loud, and the years had folded that story into something simpler to tell. "He left when things got hard. Not all at once, just slowly, until one day he was not there anymore, and I was still waiting for him to come back." She kept her eyes on the papers in front of her. "I waited 2 years, if I am honest. Told myself he would come to his senses. He never did, and now I do not let people make me promises. I try very hard not to let myself get attached to anyone who might disappear the same way." She finally looked up. "So no, I do not trust easily, Your Majesty. I have learned better." Killian could have said something grand. He had said grand things to 100 people who wanted to hear them and meant none of it. He did not, with her. "Then do not trust my words," he said instead. "Trust what I do, not what I say." Elena looked at him for a long moment, something in her chest loosening slightly, carefully, the way a held breath finally lets go. It was not a promise. It was better than one. Later that night alone, Killian returned to Damien's parchment. He had read it a dozen times already. "Trust no one who stands beside your throne," and found nothing more in it, no matter how long he stared. But the moonlight through his window fell differently tonight, low and slanted, catching the page at an angle he had not tried before. And beneath the first line, faint as breath, a second sentence emerged. Ink meant to be read only by moonlight, hidden the way Damien had hidden everything else that mattered. "Thorn knows where the first blood sleeps." Killian read it twice before the meaning fully landed, and when it did, the floor seemed to tilt beneath him. This was never only about the throne. Thorn was not trying to seize a crown. He was hunting something far older than any Ashgrave king, a power buried so deep in his family's history that Killian himself had only ever heard it spoken of in warnings, never in truth. Killian did not sleep after reading the second line. He sat with it until dawn, and when Elena found him still at his desk, he finally said the words aloud. "There is a legend older than this house," he said, "older than my family's crown. It says the first vampire queen's blood is what created all of us, every bloodline, every court, everything we are. Most believe the source died with her centuries ago. My family always knew otherwise. We simply never spoke of it." "Why not?" Elena asked. "Because whoever controls it does not only control power," he said, meeting her eyes. "They control regeneration itself. They could end an entire bloodline, or start a new one, born only of their own choosing." He paused. "Thorn does not want my throne, Elena. He wants to replace every Ashgrave who could ever challenge him, permanently." The realization about Damien came slower, and it hurt more. Killian had spent 30 years believing his brother died fighting rebels who had never truly existed, a story fed to a grieving family by the one man everyone trusted to deliver it. But the pieces, once he let himself see them, formed a different shape entirely. Damien had not died in a rebellion. He had been taken. He must have found what Thorn was searching for, or found proof of what Thorn intended, and hidden the Nightblood in his warning before Thorn could silence him for good. The message had been meant for Killian all along, sealed behind a portrait no one was allowed to look at, waiting 30 years for someone patient enough, curious enough, brave enough to find it. Killian had lived in that house for 3 decades and never found it. Ruth had needed one afternoon. That night, for the first time, Killian told Elena about his parents. "I was young," he said, "younger than you might guess. My mother trusted the wrong person, and it cost her everything. I still remember the sound of it if I let myself. His voice stayed level, but something underneath it did not. My father never recovered. He spent what was left of his life chasing revenge instead of raising a son. I inherited a crown before I understood what one cost. And you decided love was the price, Elena said quietly. I decided love makes people vulnerable, he said. So I stopped allowing myself to feel it for anyone. He looked at her, unflinching, like the confession cost him something to say plainly. It was easier that way, safer. For 200 years, it worked. Elena was quiet for a long moment. You did not become cold because you stopped feeling, she said finally. Killian looked at her. Then why? Because feeling hurt too much, she said. Something in his chest went very still. In 2 centuries, no one had ever said it back to him that plainly, had ever looked past the crown and the fear, and seen exactly what it had been protecting. The door burst open before either of them could say anything else. Are you going to marry my granddaughter? Ruth asked, entirely unbothered by the chaos she had caused. Sketchbook already tucked under one arm. Elena nearly choked. Nana. For the first time in longer than he could remember, Killian laughed, a real one, startled out of him before he could stop it. Ruth climbed onto the window seat, entirely pleased with herself. You look at her the same way you looked at my paintings when you liked one. That is how I know. Ruth Evelyn Cross. Elena's face went scarlet. It is a fair question, Killian said, still fighting the smile pulling at his mouth. One I do not have an answer to yet. That is all right, Ruth said, already reaching for her pencils again. I will ask again tomorrow. Elena buried her face in her hands. Killian, watching her, thought that of all the sounds this house had held in 200 years, he had never once heard laughter fill it quite like this. It did not last. The attack came without any warning at all. Killian went rigid mid-sentence, breath catching wrong, one hand grasping blindly for the edge of the desk. Ruth was on her feet before Elena even understood what was happening. This is the same as before, she said. Urgent now, all the warmth gone from her voice. It is the same thing. Elena caught him before he hit the floor. His veins were already darkening beneath his skin, faster this time, hungrier. Someone had given him more than before, far more. Someone has been in this room, Elena said, realization landing like a stone. She did not wait to think it through. She got Ruth behind her, dragged the door shut, and threw the bolt with hands that had stopped shaking only because there was no time left to let them. A moment later, a shadow crossed the gap beneath the door. Miss Cross, Thorne's voice drifted through the wood, calm as ever, like nothing in the world was wrong. Open the door. She kept her back pressed against it, Killian's failing weight against her shoulder. Ruth's small hand gripping the back of her dress. Miss Cross, a pause, longer this time. I will not ask twice. You are not coming in, Elena said. For a moment, silence. Then Thorne's voice changed, the warmth gone out of it entirely, replaced by something colder than the storm outside had ever managed. Then I suppose, he said, I will have to come in myself. The door shuddered against its frame, then shuddered again, harder, splintering slightly at the hinge, and Elena understood, with a cold certainty settling deep in her chest, that a locked door was never going to be enough to stop him. The door split at the hinge on the third strike. Wood splintered inward, and through the gap Elena saw them, not just Thorne, but a line of his personal guard behind him, filling the corridor shoulder to shoulder, an army for one dying king and a maid with nothing but her own body between them. Miss Cross, Thorne's voice had lost its last trace of patience. Step aside. This does not need to go any further than it already has. Elena did not move. Killian's weight sagged against her, his pulse fluttering weak and wrong beneath her hand. Behind her, Ruth stood frozen, until suddenly she was not. The key, Ruth said, urgent, tugging at Elena's sleeve. The little door under the floor, by the fireplace. I saw it when I was sketching. Elena did not ask questions. She dragged the heavy rug aside with one arm while holding Killian upright with the other. And there it was, a seam in the stone, a small lock shaped exactly like the crest on Damien's silver key. The passage swallowed them just as the door gave way behind them. The tunnel was narrow, black, and endless in the way fear makes distances feel. Killian could barely lift his own feet. I can walk, he said, for the third time, and for the third time his legs betrayed him. Elena caught him before he hit the stone floor, hauled his arm across her shoulders, and kept moving. No, you cannot. Stop arguing and let me help you. I have commanded armies, he said through gritted teeth, humiliation sharper than the poison in his veins. I do not need to be carried through my own house by someone half my size. Yes, I noticed, Elena said, adjusting her grip, steady despite the weight, nearly buckling her knees. You have carried a kingdom for 200 years, Killian. Let somebody carry you for 5 minutes. It will not kill your pride. Probably. He did not answer, but he stopped fighting her and let himself lean into her shoulder the rest of the way. The old chapel opened up ahead of them, dust-choked and forgotten, moonlight bleeding through a shattered stained-glass window overhead. And there, tucked beneath a collapsed pew wrapped in oilcloth to survive 30 years of damp stone, were Damien's records. Killian read them on his knees, because his legs still would not hold him upright. Page after page in his brother's hand, dates matching every poisoning in the family going back decades, notes on Thorne's movements, his private meetings, his growing obsession with a legend everyone else believed was only a story. Proof, in ink, of exactly what Thorne had done to Damien, and exactly what he intended to do to Killian. He has been planning this for 30 years, Killian said, hollow. He killed my brother for finding this. He has been poisoning me slowly enough to blame it on weakness, patient enough to control the council before anyone thought to question him. Elena knelt beside him, reading over his shoulder. This is enough. This is everything. It will not matter, said a voice from the chapel doorway, if neither of you live long enough to show it to anyone. Thorne stepped into the moonlight, and for the first time he did not bother smiling. 200 years, Killian, and this is what you have become, he said, his eyes moving over the scene, the king on his knees, the maid beside him, the old woman clutching an empty box behind them. Weak, sentimental, you let a servant hold you up like a child and call it strength. You murdered my brother, Killian said. Your brother was going to ruin everything our family built, Thorne said, and his gaze slid to Elena, contemptuous. And you, a human, playing nursemaid to a king, who will forget your name the moment he is strong enough not to need you. Then his eyes found Ruth, and this, he said, almost bored, was never meant to happen at all. An old woman who wandered somewhere she had no business being. Something in Killian broke loose at that. He was on his feet before he decided to move, poison and exhaustion forgotten. Every fragile ounce of strength he had left, thrown behind the fury in his chest. He did not fight like a king anymore. He fought like a man defending the only thing he had left to lose. It was not enough, not alone. Thorne was faster, stronger, untouched by weeks of poison. And within minutes he had Killian pinned against the broken altar, one hand closing slowly around his throat. Elena did not hesitate. She grabbed a length of iron candlestick from the fallen pew and swung it hard across Thorne's shoulder, buying Killian half a second, just enough for him to twist free and land one more blow that sent Thorne staggering back. It still was not enough, but Ruth had gone very still, staring at the silver key clutched in her hand, remembering suddenly that it had never quite looked like an ordinary key at all. The box, she said, was never just a hiding place. It is part of this. She moved toward the altar. There was a seal carved into the chapel floor beneath it, stone, ancient, marked with the same coiling crest that marked Thorne's ring, the black box, and the wall of names beneath the east wing. Killian had walked past it 100 times without ever knowing what it was. Ruth did not hesitate. She pressed the silver key into a groove at its center, exactly where it fit, as though it had been carved for her hand alone. Ruth, wait, Elena started. Too late. The chapel floor groaned, deep and ancient stone grinding against stone. Thorne's face went white with something Killian had never once seen on him before. What have you done? He shouted. The seal split apart beneath the altar, and where solid stone had stood a moment before, a passage yawned open, darker than the tunnel they had escaped through, older than the house itself, leading down toward something none of them had ever been meant to see, the source of the first blood. Thorne did not hesitate at the edge of the passage. He descended into the dark like a man walking toward something he had wanted his entire life. Killian went after him without stopping to think twice. Stay here, he told Elena, pulling free of her grip. Both of you behind the seal. Whatever happens down there, you do not follow. Elena caught his sleeve. Killian, I need you safe. His eyes found Ruth, small and pale beside her granddaughter. Both of you, please. He did not wait for an answer. He went down into the dark alone. The chamber beneath the chapel was older than anything Killian had ever stood inside. Walls carved with symbols that predated the house, predated the kingdom, predated even the name Ashgrave. At its center, something pulsed faintly with a dim ancient light that had no business existing after 3 centuries of silence. Thorne stood before it like a man in prayer. Do you feel it? He asked, not turning. This is what your family was built from, and you have spent 200 years pretending it does not matter, hiding it, burying it, letting it rot in the dark while our kind grows soft and complacent under your rule. You murdered my brother for this, Killian said. I murdered your brother because he was weak enough to want to protect it instead of use it, Thorne said, finally turning, and whatever mask he had worn for 30 years was fully gone now. I am going to build something greater than your family ever managed. An empire ruled by strength, not sentiment, not softness. His eyes flicked toward the passage above, toward where Elena and Ruth waited. Not distractions. Join me, Thorn said, or do not. But know this, love made you weak, Killian. It always does. Killian thought of the last 3 months, the drawings tucked beneath his book, a small, weathered hand, holding his through the worst of the pain, a woman who never once asked him for anything, who had carried him through a tunnel on legs half his size, who had looked at the king of the Nightspire Court and seen a man worth saving. Love did not make me weak, he said. He looked up toward the passage, toward the seal where Elena and Ruth stood watching, and something in his chest settled into place like it had been missing its whole life and had only just found where it belonged. It reminded me what I was fighting for. Thorn's face twisted with something close to disgust, and then he attacked. The fight was uneven from the first blow. Thorn was rested, untouched by poison, drawing strength from proximity to the very source he had spent 30 years hunting. Killian was still healed, running on will alone, and it showed. He took a hit that sent him sprawling across the ancient stone, tasted blood, and barely got his arm up in time to block the next strike. Above, Elena was not idle. She had brought Damien's records down with her. She was not leaving them behind for anyone to burn. And in the dim light, she found something she had missed the first time. Instructions written in Damien's careful hand for stabilizing the remaining poison still moving through Killian's blood. A binding herb, a pressure point, nothing that would cure him, but enough maybe to steady him for the fight he was losing. Nana, stay back, she said, already moving toward the edge of the seal with the herb crushed between her palms. But Ruth was not looking at her granddaughter. She was looking at the key, still resting in the groove where she had left it, and at Thorn, glowing faintly brighter every time he struck Killian down. It is not just a key, she whispered. It is holding something. That is why he is so strong down there. She reached out and pulled it free. The effect was immediate. Thorn staggered mid-strike, the unnatural strength draining out of him all at once, like a tide pulling back from shore. The chamber's dim light dimmed further, and Killian, given one single unguarded second, took it. By the time the royal guards finally broke through the upper passage, Thorn was on his knees, pinned, stripped of everything that had made him dangerous. He confessed to all of it right there on the chapel floor, in front of guards and council members alike. Damien's murder, the poison, 30 years of quiet manipulation, every name on that hidden wall. He did not beg. He simply stated it, flat and cold, like a man reciting a debt he had always known would come due. Every voice in that chapel expected Killian to end it himself. Instead, Killian said, "Take him. He will be tried before the full council, publicly, for every crime he has committed." It was not mercy born of weakness. Everyone in that room understood, watching him, that the king who could have ended Thorn with a single word had chosen something harder instead. 3 days later, Elena began packing. Killian found her folding Ruth's cardigans into a worn bag, and something in his chest went cold in a way the poison never had. "You are leaving," he said. "My work here is finished," Elena said. "You have a kingdom to rebuild. You need someone who belongs in your world. Not," she gestured at herself, "at the apron still hanging by the door. Not this. That is not why you are leaving," he said. She stopped folding. "I cannot let my grandmother watch me get my heart broken twice in one lifetime," Elena said. "I already taught myself that lesson once. I will not do it again." "Then let me show you otherwise," he said. "What does that mean?" she asked. He did not answer. He only asked her to stay one more night, just one, and something in his voice made her agree before she had fully decided to. She found it the next morning sitting outside her door. Not gold, not jewels, not anything a king was supposed to offer, just a small box, and inside it a single silver key. A note was tucked beneath it, written in Killian's own hand, "For the door you thought would always be closed." The key fit a door at the end of a corridor Elena had never once been permitted to enter. She turned it slowly, half expecting nothing, half expecting everything, and pushed the door open into a room flooded with morning light. It did not look like anywhere else in the house. The curtains here were not just open, they had been taken down entirely, replaced with something sheer enough to let the whole sunrise pour through. Shelves lined one wall, stacked with novels and paint sets and half-finished puzzle boxes. A table sat by the window with good light for an easel, and vases of real flowers, fresh, impossibly bright, lined every sill. Ruth stood frozen in the doorway behind her granddaughter, eyes wide, taking it all in like she did not trust it to still be there if she blinked. "Is this?" she started, and could not finish. Killian was waiting by the window, hands clasped behind his back, Watching her reaction like it mattered more than anything he had survived in the past month. "It is yours," he said. "Every person deserves a room where the light finds them first." Ruth crossed the space in 3 unsteady steps and threw her arms around him before he had even finished the sentence. Elena stood in the doorway a long moment, watching her grandmother explore a room built entirely out of small, specific kindnesses. The exact paints Ruth favored, the exact books she had once mentioned missing, a window facing the exact direction of the sunrise she loved to sketch. This was not a king trying to buy anyone's affection. Gold could not have built this. Gold did not know Ruth's favorite color, or that she liked puzzles sorted by shade before she started them, or that she had spent the last several years of her life feeling like a burden folded into someone else's schedule. Killian had built an old woman a room that said, without a single word, "You are staying and you are not a burden here." Elena understood, watching him watch Ruth laugh, exactly what he had actually been offering her all along. He found her alone later that evening, on the same window seat where all of this had started. Killian did not sit across from her the way a king holds an audience. He knelt instead, reached up and removed the crown from his own head, setting it aside on the stone floor like it weighed nothing at all. "I am not asking you to marry the king," he said. Elena's breath caught. "I am asking you to stay with the man underneath him." For a long moment she could not speak. "Killian, I want to believe you. I do. Her voice cracked, honest in a way that cost her something. "I do not know how anymore." "I will not ask you to trust my words," he said. Quiet, steady, the same voice he had used the night he told her he was not worried about Thorn. "I will spend the rest of my life proving them." Elena did not answer right away. She looked past him to where Ruth stood in the doorway, having clearly abandoned any pretense of not listening. Ruth just smiled. "He stayed," she said simply. Elena looked back at Killian, at the crown on the floor, at the man kneeling in front of her instead of standing above her, and finally, quietly, she said yes. The wedding was small, exactly the way Elena wanted it, and exactly the way Killian, for the first time in his reign, allowed himself to want something too. No grand cathedral, no endless court procession, just the chapel, clean now and restored, moonlight falling through the mended stained glass, and Ruth walking slowly ahead of the bride, scattering flower petals with the solemn concentration of a woman who understood exactly how important her job was. The Nightspire Court whispered, of course, a human bride, a maid no less, who had scrubbed their floors only months before. Killian heard every word of it and found, to his own quiet surprise, that none of it touched him at all. For 200 years he had ruled according to expectation. Tonight, for the first time, he was simply choosing his own life. Months passed, and the house became something Killian barely recognized. Every curtain stayed open now, morning and night. The dead garden bloomed back into color, tended by servants who had started laughing again in hallways that used to hold only silence. Ruth's paintings covered nearly every wall of Killian's study, sunlit rooms, smiling kings, a family standing outside a house that finally truly belonged to them. Elena no longer wore the gray uniform that had once marked her as invisible in these halls, and Killian never ate alone again. One evening, Ruth found him in the throne room, standing beside the antique black box he still kept close even now, the empty nightblood vial resting inside it. Damien's message, folded beneath the silver key that had once unlocked far more than a door. "Are you still scared of being alone?" she asked. Killian looked at Elena, seated nearby, watching them both with the quiet contentment of someone who no longer had to wonder if this would last. Then he looked at Ruth. He smiled, the real one, the one she had sketched for him long before he ever believed it was true. "No," he said. "Why not?" she asked. Killian knelt down beside her chair, the way he had the very first time she had refused to leave his room. "Because you walked into my darkest room," he said, "when everyone else had already given up on finding a way in, and you decided to stay anyway. That is not a small thing. That is the whole of it. I have told a lot of stories on this channel about kings and castles and impossible love, but if you strip away the fangs and the crowns, this one is really just about a question most of us stop asking somewhere around middle age, which is whether it is too late to let someone in." Killian had 200 years of proof that closeness gets you hurt, and he was not wrong about that proof, not exactly. People do leave. Grief does follow love around, like a shadow that never quite goes away. But he had also built himself a very convincing argument for staying closed off forever. And I think a lot of us are walking around with our own version of that same argument, polished smooth from years of use, pulled out any time someone gets close enough to matter. What changed him was not a grand gesture. It was an old woman who sat down in his dark room uninvited and simply refused to leave, and a daughter who told him the truth about her own fear instead of pretending she did not have any. Nobody staged an intervention. Nobody gave a speech. They just kept showing up, plainly and without an agenda, until showing up became its own kind of proof. I think that is closer to how real trust gets rebuilt than anything dramatic. It is not one big leap. It is 100 small, unremarkable Tuesdays where somebody could have left and did not. If you are older, like Ruth, and you sometimes feel like the world has quietly decided you are done contributing, done being interesting, done mattering to anyone's story, I hope you hear this part clearly. You are not a burden tucked into the corner of somebody else's life. You are very often the one steady hand in the room when everyone younger has lost their nerve. And if you are more like Killian, guarded because guarding yourself worked for a long time, I would only ask you to consider that the wall you built to keep the pain out is also keeping something good from ever reaching you. Love does not ask you to be fearless. It only asks you to keep the door unlocked a little longer than feels comfortable, and to let somebody prove themselves with their actions instead of deciding in advance that they will fail the way the last person did. Not everyone will. Some people really do stay. I hope, wherever you are watching this from tonight, that you have at least one person in your life who has already shown you, in small and quiet ways, that they are one of the ones who stays. And if you are still waiting to find that person, I hope this story is a small, gentle reminder that it is never too late to open the door again.